Let's face it, business technology is frustrating and complex. So how do you make sure it works for your team? To make IT right, start the discussion at go-domain.com. You're listening to Discussions by Domain, a podcast for business leaders. Our discussions may be with people you've probably heard of before, but the majority of our guests are in the trenches, professionals like you and I, with the same challenges and struggles of keeping up in the Northeast. They're implementing strategies, overcoming hurdles. They're leading the fastest growing businesses in our region. My name is Anthony DeGraw, Director of Partnerships at Domain Computer Services, and the host of this show. When I'm not talking with business leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of Domain and the ups and downs of our own growth journey, as we intend to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show. Welcome to another episode of Discussions by Domain. Today we actually have a repeat guest on, Adel Strauss, who is our Director of Marketing over at Domain Computer Services. It's early in the morning, it's Friday, yes. And I think we're going to start to call this Coffee with Adel. So thanks for coming on again, appreciate it. What we're going to talk about today is just an issue that keeps coming up. We keep getting phone calls about this and having to, what we call, bail people out of tricky situations or problems, and it's all around website security. Yes. So I wanted to get Adel on to talk about this because we've, I think, had 4 or 5 phone calls in the last week and a half, and it's probably a topic that many people aren't aware of, and they need to be aware of. It's the website hosting, the domain name is all like secondary. We've had credit cards expire, which causes huge problems and concerns. Yeah. So where would you like to start?
Well, it wasn't ever my plan to become an expert in this, but the necessity is that you have to be if you're going to be able to keep yourself out of trouble as a provider, as well as keep your clients out of trouble. The website now is just a very, very easy thing for people to hack or domain to hack, and it completely compromises everything for your client to the outside world. Once something happens to your website or your email domain, it's really hard to come back from that. And that has nothing to do with your server or your computer or anything like that. But it's very, very visible to the rest of the world.
Yeah, so why don't we talk about like 2 or 3 examples real quick of things that have actually happened in the last 2 weeks, right? Specifically what we've seen and how do we bail them out of that?
So one example is so it's not a malicious intent, but this is just as important, is an employee who thinks that they know what they can and cannot touch and update on the domain or the DNS, and in doing so, completely taking down their email, their website, so that they can't access any of it. And with that domain name server, the DNS, it's you make a change to it. It takes time a lot of times it takes time for that change to propagate. And then if you have to change it back, it takes time for that to propagate. So you're looking at 24 to 48 hours there where different things could happen and you can't really do anything about it because it just takes time. Yeah. Unfortunately, in today's world, the DNS still just takes time. It's not just a flip of a switch a lot of times.
Yeah, so what I want to highlight to the audience there is that this is an internal employee who has the authority to do what they need to do, touches something the wrong way, and it causes the entire website to go down, but more importantly, email, right? Yes. We're a lot of professional service firms working off of email to run the businesses, and when you have a team of, let's say, 50 people that no longer have access to their emails, what do you do? Yeah. And to Adel's point, that one change could take 24 hours, then to change it back could take 24 hours. Yeah. So you're looking at 2 days of missed productivity because of one simple error coming from an internal employee. And we talk a lot about this with cybersecurity in general. We can put all the technologies in place that need to be put in place, but at the end of the day, our weakest link is still that human.
Yeah, it's still the employee. Right? And so what we are doing to counter that is putting forth certain security measures so that the employees do not have access to that and don't have the authority level, whether it's admin rights or even access to the account in general, in order to make those changes. Those changes need to come through IT, and they need to be a support ticket, and they need to be scheduled, and there needs to be planning around all of that, because even if something else goes wrong in that process, we can do certain things to mitigate that risk, right?
Yeah.
Instead of just going in, updating a number, and then all of a sudden you've lost everything. So...
No, that's really good stuff there. And then give us another example. I know we've had a couple where they haven't, this is from now an outside party, a third party that is trying to do something malicious. Give us an example or two of that.
So one example is that an outside party can, without certain security measures on your actual WordPress or HTML, any kind of website installation, any content management system, they can come in and completely remove the site if they have if you don't have certain security measures, certain user level permissions in place, and it could just be gone. And if you don't have a backup, if you don't have a web hosting provider who has the certain firewalls and security measures in place, there's not really anything you can do about that. So that gets to the point of that there's not every hosting provider is the same. GoDaddy does not have the same level of security that a WP Engine has.
Yeah.
And we have chosen very carefully, based upon our security posture, a hosting provider, WP Engine, that has the full level of security, the daily backups, the firewall management, as well as the response time to ensure that if something does happen, they will have your site up and running again.
Yeah, that's really good things. And I go back to, we were just on a meeting yesterday, and we can't even get companies, or we come into companies when they don't even back up their own file servers and data within their organization. The last thing I can tell you on their mind, or the conversation gets to, is what about your website?
Yes.
How is that backed up? Who has access to it? Is it protected by multiple different sources? And I can only imagine that thing goes down and the last version is from 15 years ago.
Exactly.
Or something like that.
And then you're stuck. And to that point too is it doesn't necessarily need to be a malicious attack from somebody in India. It could be a malicious attack from a former employee who maybe you're not managing user permissions, you're not deleting people. It could be, some other admin, maybe from an outside party that somebody else is managing, whether it's your website developer or your SEO person, because we just don't really think about who has permissions and access, and that user list gets longer and longer, and nobody cleans it up or removes people.
No, and you bring up a good point that I wasn't even thinking about, is especially on the marketing side, we see so many more providers in there, right? I got an SEO provider, I got a developer, I got a designer.
And you don't know what their employees, how their employees feel about the company. You have no idea what's going on their side. So if they have access, and they have a disgruntled employee, you could be affected by that. It could be absolutely nothing to do with your own employees. Yeah,
exactly. Let's talk about some of the tools. So we've mentioned security, but we haven't kind of defined exactly what that is. So, let's rattle off a few of them. So can you talk to us about an SSL certificate and what that actually means and why a website should have it?
Yeah. So an SSL certificate is basically encrypting any information that is submitted through that website. So any forms that you have. So if you have payment, if you're collecting private data for your clients or prospects, you need to have one of those. And this is another example where they're not all the same. There are ones that have certain levels of encryption, very basic level of encryption, which if you're not really collecting private information on your website, that's fine.
Yeah.
But if you're collecting payment information or private data, then you need to have a better SSL certificate on your website. So, and that's one of those things that Google favors, and so people have figured out an easy way to do it, and that's that basic level.
Okay.
But if you have more information on your website, then you should probably be thinking about a higher level than just that basic level of SSL cert.
Yeah, and I was going to even bring up from a marketing example. I mean, my sister was just over yesterday, and she was saying, how come every time I go to this restaurant's website, my browser says, like, this is not secure?
Correct.
So from, like, a marketing perspective, too, a user going to your website, one, it's not popping up any red flags. Yeah. So it's like all of a sudden, this is weird, why is my browser telling me this? Yeah. I automatically almost don't trust you, or I know I need to be careful, which is not the
it's not the first impression that you want to get.
No, not at all, for something that could easily be done. And I know we were talking internally here too about that SSL certificate kind of verifies who you are and that you actually own this.
Yes, correct. Okay. Yeah. And to the marketing point, there's no way that you're going to convert somebody if the first thing that pops up is the site is not secure.
Yeah, exactly.
Very plainly, it's like, there's another click.
Yeah.
Why is anybody going to... They're definitely not going to give any information on there. You've already been docked, basically, in their eyes.
No, that's good. And let's talk about transition to security actual tools that you can implement and two-factor or multi-factor authentication.
Yeah. So everybody knows, especially with WordPress, every developer out there, every hacker knows exactly what your WP, it's your website /WP-admin.
Yeah.
That's your login page. Everybody knows that. You can change that, but it's can make things more difficult for users. The easier thing and the more secure thing to do, because hacker can still figure out what that other site is to put 2FA, so two-factor authentication. And there are different forms of it, but the best one is to have a token on your phone, which we use the service Duo. That one ensures that it's managed by an outside party, a third party, so that, like, let's say you have an employee who needs access to the website, or a third party, like an SEO firm, needs access to the website. They have that token, and they would log into the WP admin page. They'd get notified on their phone, they would confirm it, and then let's say that you don't want them to have it anymore. As a third-party token, you can then remove it from their phone without any permissions or anything like that. Google Authenticator and some of these freebie ones, that's not possible. Okay. So you put that on 2FA on your website, and they are a disgruntled employee, or you fire that SEO firm, there's nothing you can do really to remove that 2FA from their phone.
Understood.
Without uninstalling and then reinstalling and having to go through this whole big process.
Yeah, and setting up, from what I understand, setting up these tools to do this isn't the simplest thing.
No, it's not.
You need a license to be able to do it. And you mentioned there, I want to clarify too, every user that has the ability to get into that login screen or make changes or do whatever should have this two-factor system set up, right? I have a username, I have a password,
and that's the other thing. You can't get in if you don't have it.
Exactly.
So let's say in the SEO firm, they have one user who has the two-factor authentication token on their phone, but then they have another employee who tries to access it for whatever reason. Yeah. That employee, even if they have the username and password, they can't get in. Yeah. Only that employee can get in. And it helps to hold people accountable. So somebody does get in, something does happen, a change is made that wasn't authorized, you can trace back, okay, this person has access, this is the person that I hold accountable for.
Yeah, and that's really good too. That's a good point. We've seen a lot of times where an employee does something maliciously, and then we go to look to see who it is, or what's called logs, and then it's like, well, it's the same username and password for every user. Yeah, we have no idea.
You have no way of knowing.
We just dealt with a breach, right? And it was the same. Every user had the same thing, so you couldn't even tell what device it came to, what user it came from, who did something wrong. We have no idea.
Correct. Yeah.
So that's good stuff. I think that hits everything on my list here. Oh, specifically, you talked about hosting and backups, but why don't we walk through a couple of those providers? You briefly mentioned them, somebody like a WP Engine or whatnot. So talk to, when you were looking for these services, what were you looking for and what did they accomplish?
Yeah. So I was looking for a couple of things. I was looking for daily backups that were running automatically and that were very easy to restore. With WP Engine, it's one click. So if something happens and the site is gone, and with one click in a matter of minutes, I can have a backup right away. I was looking for uptime. that they guarantee a certain amount of uptime. They guarantee 99.9% uptime. And I was also looking for SLA. How quickly do you respond if there is an issue? They have a chat 24/7, 365 available. And I have used it many times, and I get somebody within literally minutes.
It's awesome.
So that just ensures that no matter what happens, whether it's myself or another engineer, somebody can get in contact with them and figure out what's going on. And the other thing I was looking for was security.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of layers of security. They're not thinking about web hosting as just let me give you a website for as cheap as possible. They're looking at what are all of the steps that we need to take in order to ensure that your website is secure. Firewall, threat management, all of those kinds of spam filters, those kinds of things. Because their guarantee is that if you are hacked, they will recover. So if they're going to put themselves on the line for that, then they're going to put all of the measures in place in order to ensure it doesn't happen.
Exactly. So everybody, this is Adel Strauss, Marketing Director over at Domain Computer Services. She's seen it all, GoDaddy, hosting your own site, WordPress engine, all the different tricks and stuff that gets out there. It's probably time to revisit your website. We're seeing, like I said, in the last week, we're in January of 2020, and within a week and a half, we had 5 calls about this exact topic. And when you're engaging us, I think we get those calls because we are a cybersecurity firm first, and technology, so they put the 2 and 2 together. Yep. But there's a lot that goes into this kind of stuff. If your website is vulnerable or you haven't thought of any of these things, definitely reach out and get ahead of this, because if they take down that domain, your email's going with it. And it could be a couple days to 2 weeks. We've seen an instance where they had to completely change their domain name, right? Emails, everything, just because it wasn't going to happen. Yep. So give us a call, reach out. Adel's always available for you guys. Once again, this is the first Coffee Time with Adel Strauss. Thank you.
To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. This guarantees that every episode will get delivered directly to your device. To help us get the word out, share with a friend, leave a review, and check out our discussions on the web at go-domain.com/podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.